Look, as a hotelier, I'm really always, I get such a feeling when I come into this fabulous hotel, 90 years old. It's an architectural masterpiece inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, and MacArthur actually used Frank Lloyd Wright as his consultant on the project. But why I like it, I've seen so many great things happen in this hotel. I'm reminded of a Churchill quote, where in 1944 in the House of Commons he said, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards they shape us." And I think this hotel is emblematic of that. And I hope today that you'll learn some, from Randolph and Jennie, learn some traits which will, frankly, influence your life. They're going to talk about their great-great-grandparents of a man whose legacy still inspires so many. And I will tell you, without a doubt, I suspect there's few in this room would disagree, that this is the man without whom democracy and the freedoms we enjoy today just simply would not be the same. And the International Churchill Society exists not just, as his daughter Mary Soames admonished us to do, keep his memory green, but to make sure that we build on this amazing legacy that he left us and ensure that the lessons learned from this vast swath of a life well lived remain relevant, guide and inspire tomorrow's generations and leadership, and boy do we need it. Today we have over 3,000 members in the United States, Canada, Australia, Israel, and an incredibly active chapter in Iceland. I guess there's not much to do there. Didn't say that. We have we publish a truly acclaimed magazine, Finest Hour, a Churchill Bulletin, and these magazines have become collector's pieces. This year our annual conference is going to be in London in October. Please come and join us. It's a fantastic venue to have a Churchill conference, and if any of you know London, we're celebrating our gala at the end of the conference in London's historic Guildhall. It's our constant stream of programming, events, conferences, and frankly, convening all the other Churchill or related organizations. Many of you have heard of the National Trust, the English-Speaking Union. It's these things we do. We look after the American National Churchill Museum in Fulton, Missouri. We built the National Churchill Library and Center on the grounds of the campus of George Washington University in Rocky Bottom in DC. But we want to ensure that the future, where it can be, and rightfully so, guided by Churchill's legacy, is relevant. These lessons are relevant, and we'll leave no stone unturned, no politician unbadgered, no newspaper not asked to publish. We're doing everything we can through social media, and direct lobbying to make sure that the lessons are learnt. We don't have a chapter in Scottsdale or Phoenix, and frankly, we hope we can inspire some of you to be involved with us, because the work is good and the cause is noble and the times are so turbulent and volatile. We need this stability that we can perhaps learn from the lessons of history. You know, in 1946, in Fulton, Missouri, Churchill gave a speech which gave the world its modern definition of the Iron Curtain. Great speech. In that speech, he said something which I personally believe is the best commentary about how he felt about the very foundations of this United States, of which I am a proud citizen, this country as well as the United Kingdom. So I want to read you these words before I introduce Randolph and Jennie, because they never, ever fail to give me a choke in my throat. He said, "We must never cease to proclaim in fearless tones the great principles of freedom and the rights of man, which are the joint inheritance of the English-speaking world, which, through the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, the habeas corpus, trial by jury, and the English common law find their most famous expression in the American Declaration of Independence. That's how he felt about the United States, and that's why I'm proud to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to Randolph and Jennie. I was friends with their late father, and I guess they inherited me. They are the most remarkable ambassadors for the Churchill family. You can read their resumes. They are tireless workers in the cause of their great-grandfather's legacy, not because it's history, but because it represents the future. Randolph and Jennie.
Find my pieces at the back. There we go. So firstly, thank you very much, Lawrence, for this wonderful introduction. And Sarah, Jennie and I thank you and all your members so much for your wonderful warm welcome. What an incredible audience. Thank you all so, so much. Now, to introduce what Jennie and I are going to do, Sarah has performed an absolute miracle because we wanted to have some slides to show you and to tell you the story which we're going to relate easily. So Sarah's actually produced this wonderful little booklet, and I know most of it might be on tape, but if you can look at it, I just want to introduce you to the characters that we're going to talk about. So on the front it says, "From Brooklyn to Blenheim and beyond." And if you turn over to the first page, you've got this wonderful image of Jennie Jerome from Brooklyn with her elder son Winston and younger son Jack. On the opposite page, you've got an incredible photograph of Winston by Joseph Karsh, done in Canada at Ottawa during the Second World War. On page 4, entitled "A Man of Action," you've got Churchill when he's somewhat slimmer, in his uniform as a hussar, and I must say no one in the family would fit into that uniform nowadays. And then of course Churchill, the man of words, with Abraham Lincoln behind him there. But then just turning the page on, you've got Churchill's magisterial address at the Joint Houses of Congress, which we're going to talk about. And on the opposite side of the page, you've got his maternal grandfather, who we will mention, Leonard Jerome. On the following page, you've got Leonard's wife, Clara, and we will talk about Clara. And then on the opposite page, you have the beautiful Jennie Jerome. And I must say, my sister Jennie has so many of the same bone structures and features of her beautiful great-great-grandmother. The next page over, we're going to talk about a remarkable meeting. And this is the invitation that we still treasure in the family, where Lord Randolph and Jennie Jerome met, and we're going to talk about that. And Jennie has written in her own hand to meet Randolph there. And opposite you have their engagement photograph at Blenheim Palace, with Jennie with Lord Randolph's dog Puggles sitting on his lap. That was their engagement photograph. You then have Jennie about to go out hunting at Blenheim Palace. She was a brilliant horsewoman. And then on the opposite page, for the Boer War, Jennie fundraised from American friends and took a hospital ship to South Africa, and Jennie became the matron in charge of the ship. And the following page shows Jennie with her younger son Jack, who was in Winston's care, and he'd been shot in the leg, and he was almost the first patient. But the soldiers thought very highly of Jennie Jerome, and so they named this incredible gun after Jennie in her honor. And the final page, which we will talk about in our talk, is Jennie Jerome. Here she is campaigning in Oldham for her son Winston for his elections. She was a public figure in her own right, and there she is making her speech to support her son. And opposite her obituary, where it says, Lady Churchill was the US's best ambassador. And finally, a portrait I treasure of Jennie, and at the moment there's a wonderful portrait of her at the Morgan Library done by John Singer Sargent on display, and the medals that she was presented for what she did and achieved. So you can put that to one side now. You've now been introduced to the characters. We wish to record in the first instance how grateful we are to our great friends Sita and Erwin Stelzer for kindly proposing this great event. Sita's book, Dinner with Churchill, Policy Making at the Dinner Table, is brilliant and available. It is thoroughly researched, eloquently written. It fits perfectly with the theme of this afternoon of important meetings. I had the great privilege of writing the foreword for Sita's most recent book, Working with Winston. He was an impossible man, the unsung woman behind Britain's greatest statesman. In this book, Sita documents the incredible support our great-grandfather Sir Winston received from the many women who worked tirelessly to ensure that Churchill could defend our liberties. It is thus very appropriate that we're giving this presentation at the Sandra Day O'Connor Institute, celebrating the remarkable public life and servant that Justice O'Connor has given. And it's something which still inspires today, and it's wonderful to see you here celebrating her legacy. Our theme this afternoon is meetings and the importance of bringing people together, particularly in the modern world of sound bites, smartphones, the tyranny of email. It's amazing anybody has any time to meet anybody. But I can say without hesitation that if Churchill had not met, wined and dined and shared grief and joy with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the world we live in today would be very different. Churchill's visits to Washington, in particular his stay in the White House for Christmas 1941, had a huge impact on their relationship. Face to face, they laid the foundations for unprecedented political and military alliance. In fact, it was following a conversation with Churchill on the failure of the League of Nations that President Roosevelt had a eureka moment, and he came up with the United Nations. Roosevelt made his way to Churchill's bedroom at the White House and knocked on the door. Churchill replied, and he was in the pink. And as Churchill said, proving beyond any shadow of doubt, the Prime Minister of Great Britain has nothing to hide from the President of the United States. The historian Andrew Roberts, in his recent and inspiring biography of Churchill, Walking with Destiny, has captured beautifully the essence of the historic perspective, the drive, the determination, the stubbornness, the triumphs, the tragedies of Churchill's life. But ultimately, Churchill's success was derived from his belief in his own destiny. By the age of 25, Churchill had been shot at in the Cuban Civil War. He had fought on the northwest frontier of India. He'd charged on horseback with the 21st Lancers at the Battle of Omdurman, and he'd escaped as prisoner of war in the Boer War in South Africa, returning home a national hero. He used that platform to become a member of Parliament. He said to his friend Violent Bonham Carter, "We are all worms, but I do believe I am a glowworm." In those dark days when Churchill came to office as Britain's Prime Minister in May 1940, he not only had to deal with the uncertainty in his own party, but also with the collapse of the Belgian and French forces in the Dunkirk crisis and the subsequent evacuation of the entire British Army, 230,000 soldiers. In short, the fall of France. Russia was still bound to the Nazis through the infamous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and the United States was neutral and not yet committed to Lend-Lease. It was at this critical hour in May 1940 that Churchill later reflected, "I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial." Although Churchill had been born at Blenheim Palace, a palace that glorifies his ancestor John I Duke Marlborough's famous victories over the French King Louis XIV, and thus a descendant of British aristocrat, we will argue that it was Churchill's American ancestry that provided the spark, independence, determination, strength of character, and oratory skills that would see Churchill save the free world and form an alliance with Franklin Roosevelt. Becoming Prime Minister on 10 May 1940, when Churchill met his cabinet on the 13th May, he told them, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." And in 1963, when President Kennedy honored Churchill with the honorary American citizenship, he requoted the words of your great broadcaster, Ed Murrow, who during World War II said Churchill had mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. With that famous American quote in mind, I will hand over to Jennie to talk about Churchill's remarkable American genes, family, and characteristics. Jennie.
Good afternoon. Some parts of this story are by family legend, and some modern scholarship claims to have disproved the connection. However, it was very much believed by Churchill's maternal grandparents, the Jeromes, that their family had indigenous Indian ancestry. When President Roosevelt told Churchill of his early American ancestry, Churchill replied, "Mr. President, my ancestors were here to greet yours." Churchill was half American by birth, a fact which he was deeply proud of. In his first address to a joint session of the United States Congress on the 26th of December 1941, he teased the assembled senators and representatives with the mischievous suggestion, "If my father had been American and my mother British, instead of the other way round, I might have got here on my own." His mother, Jennie Jerome, of Brooklyn, New York, later Lady Randolph Churchill, was a noted beauty of her day. Churchill, as a young cavalry officer, shamelessly used all the influence she was able to bring in his quest to see action in different parts of the globe, from Cuba and the northwest frontier to Sudan and South Africa. Through his maternal grandfather, Leonard Jerome, sometime proprietor and editor of the New York Times, Churchill had at least two forebears who fought against the British in the American War of Independence. One great-grandfather, Samuel Jerome, served in the Berkshire County Militia, while another, Major Lebus Ball of the 4th Massachusetts Regiment, marched and fought with George Washington's army at Valley Forge. Furthermore, Leonard Jerome's maternal grandfather, Reuben Murray, served as a lieutenant in the Connecticut and New York regiments, while his wife Clara's grandfather, Ambrose Hall, was a captain in the Berkshire County Militia at Bennington. Churchill loved the fact that he had no ancestors that fought for the British in the War of Independence. And he was delighted to be presented with the Cincinnati Medal for those descendants who had ancestors that fought alongside Washington. Not only did Churchill have revolutionary blood in his veins, but possibly Native American as well. According to family tradition, Jennie's maternal grandmother, Clarissa Wilcox, was half Iroquois. Indeed, she and her sister were known in the family as Sitting Bull and Hatchet. Although modern scholarship casts doubts on our Native American ancestry, Jennie Jerome and her sister, Leonie, firmly believed the story to be true. Having been told by their mother, Clara, "My dears, there is something you should know. It may not be chic, but it is rather interesting." In addition, the family portrait of Clara lends credence to the suggestion that she may have been quarter Iroquois, with her oval face and dark features. Leonie also said, remarking on her exceptional energy, "That's my Indian blood, only don't let Mama know I told you." In the family, we certainly always sense that Churchill had an extraordinary belief in his destiny. By his own account, Churchill, despite fighting 6 wars on 3 continents, certainly believed that his great American ancestry was a strong part of his destiny. As he said when fighting aged 23 in India, I am so conceited. I do not believe the gods would create so potent a being as myself for so prosaic an ending, referring to being killed in combat. Jennie's American father, Leonard Jerome, was a true, proud, fiercely independent, buccaneering, ambitious, entrepreneurial American, and certainly a loving and doting father. Leonard made and lost several fortunes. He co-owned the New York Times and founded Jerome Park and Coney Island Jockey Club. Famously, at a dinner at the Union Club in New York in 1866, Leonard, who adored sailing off Newport, became the guardian of a bet between 3 yacht owners on the world's first ocean race. The owners agreed to set off from Newport in the toughest months of the year, December, to race their yacht to the Isle of Wight in England. Each owner waged $30,000, a simply huge sum in 1866, and in the gales across the Atlantic, a number of crewmen were killed or lost at sea. At the dinner, celebrating the race of the Royal Yacht Squadron in the Isle of Wight, Leonard gave a remarkable speech where he toasted peace and prosperity to the United States and Great Britain. In his remarks, which were received with great acclaim and hoots of laughter, he concluded with these wonderful Churchillian comments. In conclusion, let me say, let us bring our yachts and racehorses into friendly competition, meet together in social way, and keep aloof from all the politicians, and there can never be any difficulty between England and America.
Loud cheers.
With our flags flying as we see them tonight, our national mottos side by side, God bless the Queen and the President, and our hands united in cordial grasp of sincere friendship, the countries will go on together in their careers of glory, the envy, the admiration, and the rulers of the world. He finished to huge cheers. What remarkable premonition in 1866 of a future relationship. There is no doubt in my mind that Leonard's genes, together with his adventuring, buccaneering zest and determination, were much inherited by his grandson, Winston Churchill. However, Churchill's mother, Jennie Jerome, was also truly one of the most remarkable people in her own right. Jennie Jerome was born in the middle of a huge snowstorm in Brooklyn in 1854. It was a different world. Brooklyn and New York were still separate cities, and construction on the Brooklyn Bridge, the first span to connect Manhattan with Long Island, did not begin until Jennie was 17. Jennie was the standout of the 3 Jerome sisters. Supremely intelligent, she spoke languages fluently. She rode horses as well as any man, and she was a concert pianist of great talent. Our family still treasures her music today. Jennie's first visit to Blenheim was on a beautiful spring day in May 1874. She later wrote in her book of reminiscences, Lord Randolph proudly remarked, "This is the finest view in England." Jennie felt awed by the magnificence, but her American pride forbade the admission. In true Jennie style, her son Winston was born during a ball at Blenheim Palace, which she had attended. Jennie wrote beautifully, writing extensively on everything from personal letters to fashion and to theatre. Jennie was a modern woman in every respect. She was not afraid to speak her mind, partake in politics, and was always comfortable being the centre of attention. The traditional English ladies took severe exception to her natural beauty, her aura, and her ability to bring people together and achieve things in an extraordinary way. Indeed, Jennie wrote, "In England, as on the continent, the American woman was looked upon as a strange and abnormal creature, with habits and manners something between a Red Indian and a Gaiety girl. Anything of an outlandish nature might be expected of her. If she talked, dressed, and conducted herself as any well-bred woman would, much astonishment was invariably evinced, and she was usually saluted with a tactful remark, 'I should never have thought you were an American,' which was indeed intended as a compliment. Jennie not only became her husband, Lord Randolph's greatest supporter, but also the staunchest promoter of her son, Winston Churchill. Jennie helped Lord Randolph raise money for those stricken by famine in Ireland. At a time when it was uncommon, she visited prisoners in prison. The Prime Minister would attend her political salon. She acted as literary agent to her son. She secured his military postings. With correspondence to the Prime Minister, she helped her husband fight 9 election campaigns, and she also made speeches in the campaigns for her son. During the Boer War, which was not a popular war, being viewed as an imperial war from the American perspective, Jennie raised monies and became matron of a ship. She organized an American vessel called the Maine as a hospital ship, which she took to South Africa for the treatment of the injured. On arrival, Jennie's youngest son, Jack, Sir Winston's brother, was one of the first to be brought aboard with a bullet wound to his leg. In the Great War, which we call the First World War, Jennie persuaded her friend, the famous American Paris singer, to give over his stately home to be a hospital, and Jennie commandeered it and put all the medical staff into place. Jennie was a proud, true American doer, and there is no doubt that she bestowed her great gifts and connections and contacts with the likes of Burt Cochrane onto her son, Winston. So, although Jennie had not been close or much there during her children's younger years, on her death, Winston said, "She shone for me like the evening star." He continued, "I loved her dearly, but at a distance. In advancing my career, she cooperated energetically from her end. In my interest, she left no wire unpulled, no stone unturned, and no cutlet uncooked."
Well done, Jennie. So now let us turn to the extraordinary coincidence of fate that caused Lord Randolph to meet Jennie Jerome 147 years ago in Cowes on the Isle of Wight, the south coast of England, where Queen Victoria went each summer to her beautiful house at Osborne. What better way could there be to tell the love story of Randolph and Jennie than in their own words and from their own letters? And just in case you were wondering, I will play the part of Lord Randolph and Jennie will play the part of Jennie. So, 147 years ago, Lord Randolph met a beautiful American girl and the young English aristocrat. Lord Randolph was the younger son of the Duke of Marlborough. 19-year-old Jennie Jerome from Brooklyn, New York, had been living with her mother and sisters in Paris. Without their meeting on the Isle of Wight, there would have been no Winston Churchill. Without that meeting, it may well be that many of us here today would not be here. But what is undeniably true is that my sister Jennie and I would definitely not be here. So we offer the following story in homage to our namesakes and great-great-grandparents.
Of course, Leonard Jerome, Jennie's flamboyant father, knew the Isle of Wight well. His ancestors were first on the island in 1710, either as islanders or fleeing from France as Protestant French Huguenots. As I mentioned, Leonard returned to the island after creating the world's first ocean race, which in a dramatic finish arrived on Cowes on Christmas Day, 1866. In 1871, 72 and 73, Leonard Jerome rented villas in Cowes for his family. Having been presented to the Prince and Princess of Wales in 1873, Jennie, her sister Clarita, and mother Clara Jerome were invited to a dance at the invitation of the Queen Victoria's son, the Prince of Wales, on the Cowes Week guardship HMS Ariadne on the 12th of August, 1873.
Lord Randolph went out to HMS Ariadne on a launch from the Royal Yacht Squadron steps. And as he went up the gangway to see the party which had already started, he automatically spied this beautiful girl who he was determined to meet. Both Jennie and her sister Clarita were dressed in twill dresses adorned with fresh flowers. Randolph arranged an introduction. Though he suffered headaches while dancing, he asked Jennie to dance a quadrille, of which he was unsure of the steps. Afterwards, they sat out and talked, sipping champagne. Randolph was captivated by the grey-eyed, beautiful Jennie. Her effect on him was powerful, and she in turn was captivated by the young aristocrat. It was love at first sight.
Jennie convinced her mother to invite Lord Randolph to dinner at their rented villa. Randolph, of course, was delighted to accept. The dinner was a success. The Jeromes kept a French cook, so the food was excellent. The night was beautiful, with an occasional breeze and bright stars in the sky. Afterwards, Jennie confided in her sister, saying she had a presentiment this was the man she would marry. Many years later, Jennie recorded that they had spent a very pleasant evening, my sister and I playing duets at the piano and chatting merrily.
After he left the dinner, Randolph confided to his friend, Colonel Edgecombe, that he would like to make the Dark One his wife.
Jennie and Randolph met the next day by accident, when she took her daily walk along Cowes Esplanade and he walked his pug dog, Puggles. But Mrs. Jerome refused to allow Jennie to invite them to dinner. However, Jennie persisted, and as the following day was Randolph's last in Cowes, Mrs. Jerome relented. Randolph received a calling card from Mrs. Jerome. I shall be most happy to see you at dinner this evening. Truly yours, C.H. Jerome. It was once again a bewitching evening at Villa Rosetta. Jennie played the piano, probably her beloved Chopin. Jennie later described Randolph's proposal to her at this, their third meeting. She wrote that she and Randolph had walked in the garden when, finding ourselves alone for a moment, he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. We agreed not to say anything to my mother, as she would not understand the suddenness of it. They were engaged to be married within 2 days of meeting.
Randolph was meant to leave the following morning, but postponed his trip, sending Jennie this note. Dear Miss Jeanette, I missed my boat and have not been able to go, so shall not start till early Monday morning. Thank you so very much for the photograph, which is much better than the others. Shall hope to see you after church tomorrow. You see, I keep turning up like a bad shilling. Randolph kept his invitation for that first dance on HMS Ariadne in a box by his bedside for the rest of his life, and we still treasure that invitation today.
Jennie also kept her invitation to the dance on HMS Ariadne and marked it up to meet Randolph.
Although the pair were in love, they agreed for the time being it must remain secret. Randolph postponed his departure for another 4 days.
Before Randolph finally left, Jennie told her mother about the engagement. When Mrs. Jerome heard the news, she was not at all pleased. She believed that a second son, like Randolph, was not much of a catch and felt that her daughter could do much better. Mrs. Jerome told her that she could never agree to anything so precipitous. In England, the eldest son inherits the title and the family money. The second son was expected to join the church. Woe betide being a daughter. Jennie wrote to Randolph that same evening, I cannot bear to have you leave Cowes, dearest, without a last goodbye. I have told Mamma, who, although she likes you very much, won't hear of it. But I am sure we shall easily get her on our side later on, when we see you in London or perhaps here. God bless you, darling.
Randolph was equally optimistic and wrote the next morning to Jennie, telling her how her note which he had received just as he was leaving Cowes had cheered him up wonderfully. I cannot think, he continued, your mother will really not hear of our engagement. Only I'm sure she thinks we've known each other for too short a time. You and I do not think so, but it's natural your mother should.
There was further consternation when Randolph broke the news to his mother at Blenheim Palace. The Duchess of Marlborough, formerly Lady Frances Anne Emily Vane, third daughter of the third Marquis of Londonderry, was a commanding woman with great character. She was most displeased that Randolph, her second and favourite son, should have done anything so contrary to her own ambitions for him. The very idea of marrying an American was in and of itself immensely displeasing. And for him to contemplate doing such a thing after such a short acquaintance was folly.
Despite his mother's displeasure, Randolph was deeply committed to his intended bride. Mrs. Jerome had forbidden Jennie to correspond with him, but Randolph wrote passionately from Blenheim. By the second day of separation, he was miserable and missing her. He writes, "My own darling Jeanette, I cannot let another day pass without writing to you. I do not think I ever had such a day as yesterday, such a melancholy journey away from you, and then to have to listen to the twaddle and gossip of my mother and sisters when my heart and thoughts were elsewhere. It is so curious that my rooms and my things and my occupation here, which I used to take an interest in, are quite hateful now. All I can do is keep reading your letter and looking at your photographs and thinking till I get quite stupid." Randolph then wrote to his father, "I do not think if I were to write pages I could give you any idea of the strength of my feeling and affections and the love for her. All I can say is I love her better than life itself, and that my one hope and dream is that matters may be so arranged that soon I may be united to her by ties that nothing but death itself could have the power to sever." He understood that his father might be very much surprised, but added that despite the rapidity of the decision, it was one in which he believed absolutely.
The Duke of Marlborough, unconvinced by his son's letter, delayed his reply while he made inquiries about Leonard Jerome. Initially, he opposed the marriage, writing, "Never was there such an illustration of the adage, 'Love is blind,' for you seem blind to all consequences in order that you may pursue your passion." Matters went from bad to worse. On hearing of the Duke's opposition to the union, Leonard went into a rage and wrote, "My consent withdrawn." European aristocracy impressed Leonard less than they impressed themselves. Meanwhile, a chill descended on Blenheim. What exactly were Americans? Rebels against the British crown? And did one marry them? But Randolph wore the Duke down. First, the ceremony was to be delayed for a year, then only until after the general election in February 1874. Randolph duly became the MP for Woodstock, and Jennie became Lady Randolph Churchill at a ceremony in the British Embassy in Paris on the 15th of April, 1874. Winston was born on the 30th of November, and the rest is, as they say, history.
It is clear that the birth of Jennie Jerome in Brooklyn, New York, was the most wonderful gift that the New World could give to the Old World. Jennie's greatest trait was the spirit of freedom and liberation pioneered by the early Americans. Jennie was also certainly her father's daughter. Leonard was a king of Wall Street, and Jennie's ancestors were fighters for independence. I should also admit that Leonard, a true American, is buried in Brooklyn at Greenwood Cemetery, which is where we British let George Washington escape, and as a result, the United States became a nation. It is obvious that Leonard loved Jennie dearly and wanted the best for her. In his correspondence with her future father-in-law, the Duke of Marlborough, after somewhat pointed debate over their finances, Leonard wrote to the Duke, "It is quite wrong to suppose I entertain any distrust of Randolph. On the contrary, I firmly hope and believe that there is no young man in the world safer. Still, I can but think your English custom of making the wife so utterly dependent on the husband most unwise." Well said, Leonard. So in conclusion, I would like us all to remember the great consequences of this partnership between our nations. In the modern world, there are no more important documents for freedom and liberty than the British Magna Carta and the US Declaration of Independence. Churchill deliberately linked them in his last great multi-volume work, History of the English-Speaking Peoples. Without the birth of Jennie Jerome in Brooklyn, there would have been no Churchill, no special relationship with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and quite probably no shared defeat by our allied nations of the dark tyranny of Nazism. The shrines of our hard-earned freedoms might have been forgotten, trampled underfoot with the triumph of barbarism and totalitarianism, and the world we live in now might, as Churchill said, sink into the abyss of a new dark age. In May 2020, this year, we will commemorate the 75th anniversary of V-Day, the end of the terrible war in Europe, less than a year after the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. We owe a debt of honor to those young men who landed on a beach in a foreign land and who in many cases gave their lives so we might have a better one ourselves. To honor that generation of those who served, those of us who have left must never forget the heroes who gave us our freedoms. There is no doubt that when Churchill went to Washington for Christmas 1941 to meet Roosevelt and to map out the route to victory, when Churchill addressed the Joint House of Congress, he would have had a tear in his eye when he said, "I wish indeed that my mother, whose memory I cherish across the veil of the years, could have been here to see." Let us raise our glasses to Jennie Jerome and Churchill's American forebearers. Thank you.
Okay, first question. From Sir Winston's long and varied life, there are many lessons learned that are relevant to today. What facet, both of you should answer individually, of his life do you feel is there an example that motivates you or you'd like others to follow? Randolph?
Very simply, everybody has their own challenge in life to do their best and to achieve. And Churchill's motto, never, never, never give in. And that strength of feeling is such an inspiration to so many people. If you work hard enough at something, you have every chance of succeeding, but never give in.
Jennie?
Well, I think it all started really with Winston's courage. And it was his courage to go out and fight the wars that he did that gave him the prominence that he was then able to come back and enter Parliament and become an MP, and that led him on his road to becoming Prime Minister. So important to start your life in the right frame.
Okay, Jennie, I know at one time you were telling me of a story of D-Day. Randolph just mentioned it. Help me understand what happened between Winston and Clementine the evening before D-Day.
Well, Winston and Clementine were dining alone, and he was obviously pondering this huge action that was going to take place that night. And the two of them had the world on their shoulders, because how do you go to bed knowing that maybe 20,000 men will meet their deaths that night? Luckily, because the preparations had been done very well, it was all okay. It wasn't as bad as it could have been foreseen, but a huge burden to bear.
Randolph, everybody in this room probably has heard Churchill anecdotes or quotes, and some of them may even be true. What's your personal favourite?
It's actually one in Sita's book, Dining with Churchill, which is available out there. Thank you, Sita. And this is at the Yalta conference, and Sita and I heard it firsthand from one of Churchill's interpreters, Hugh Lungi. They had these incredible dinners and banquets at these conferences, and Yalta was no different. And at the end of the dinner, an incredible baked Alaska pavlova was brought in and being carried along high up above the heads. And as it was brought along, Churchill could see instantaneously that it was on the move and out of control. Anyway, the pavlova crashed down, and it crashed all over Stalin's interpreter. And the interpreter was so scared, he just had to carry on with his whole dessert on top of him. And the head of the Royal Air Force, and it just missed Stalin by literally just one person. And the head of the Royal Air Force, Charles Portal, turns around to Winston and says, "Damn, missed the target." That's in Sita's book. And we heard it both firsthand from Winston's interpreter at the Yalta conference. It's a truly wonderful story.
Jennie, from your perspective, an anecdote that you like to repeat?
Well, I'm stuck there.
There we go.
No, well,
Move on to
a real question.
Yes.
See what I live with? Okay. And this is a real question that I can't even contemplate it. You grew up, both of you, surrounded by Churchill's family, those who knew Churchill.
Swap microphone.
Thank you very much. And people who feature so large in history. What insights can you shed? What stories? How do you feel about that? How has it changed your lives? Randolph? No, actually, Jennie.
Jennie.
You start.
Well, we were lucky enough to grow up very close to Winston's home, Chartwell in Kent. And obviously, there were several of his secretaries who lived nearby. They used to walk up and down to work, often finishing very late at night or in the early hours of the morning. But Grace Hamlin, who lived on the green in the village, she was very special to our family, and she used to come for Christmas lunch and always told us lovely stories, but how they put up with life with the Churchills, it could never have been easy.
Randolph?
I'm just very briefly going to elaborate on that. Sita's more recent book, The Women That Worked for Churchill, she's managed to get the individual anecdotes of the secretaries and the things they were expected. Grace Hamlin was meant to run the family finances, which were disastrous. And Winston used to sum her up and say, well, who do we need to pay this week? Oh no, we shan't pay that person. Let's pay that person half. And it's beautifully done in Sita's book, is just showing the dedication of these people behind Churchill. When you think that he ran the war with a team of maybe 3 or 4 secretaries and a number of other advisors, the scale of the correspondence and dedication. Grace Hamlin used to walk home to her home at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, through the dark, having dictation through the night, coming back the following day. That dedication to us is so inspiring.
I've been given some questions from the audience, and many of them are very similar. So I guess the question I'd like to ask based on this is, how do you handle reading about your family and, of course, seeing them on the screen, the Gary Oldman movie, Darkest Hour, and, of course, there's 4 questions on it, how do you feel about The Crown? And rather than the monarchy, the TV series.
Well, Darkest Hour was a fabulous film, and Randolph and I were lucky enough to go and see them making it. We walked in, there was Gary Oldman, all made up as Winston. It was truly incredible. I think he'd spent 4 or 5 hours every day in makeup, and yes, he looked like our great-grandfather.
It was so stirring. Gary Oldman, to get into the part, he's a huge Churchill fan. He could recite probably 20 speeches off by heart. And so there was no second cuts or second takes. He would just do it straight up. And I still have constant dialogue with him. And he's always finding Churchill gems, and he's collecting rather too many books at the moment.
Well, Randolph, I seem to recall some story about you and he sharing a platform at one time. And can you help me on that one?
Well, Oldman's been the bad person of film. He's never cooperated with the producers, the directors, the media, or anything. And he said, Randolph, I'm rather proud of what I've achieved as Churchill. And he said, this is my chance to maybe take this forward to higher claim. And so I went out and spent a long weekend with him in California. And we spoke to the Golden Globes and the Oscars nomination committee. and we had a showing, and the committee members afterwards, they asked us questions on stage, and I have no hesitation that his depiction of my great-grandfather is absolutely right up there with Robert Hardy, Simon Ward, and the others. No one has mastered his speeches better than Gary Oldman.
Jennie, you worked at the Palace, you've worked for the Royal Household, for the Royal Collection. Come on, comments on the Crown.
Oh, I couldn't possibly say.
I promise you it will stay in confidence here. No comment?
No comment.
Okay, did you enjoy it?
Yes, the Crown was wonderful. I think we all enjoyed it, but I think the next generation have to realise that's not really history. So much is made up, but they're entertaining us.
Okay. The other part of the question that you both have studiously avoided answering is, how do you handle reading about your family, even the criticisms of it? How does it grasp you? What do you feel?
Well, the criticism is tomorrow's fish and chip paper, is
Well
what we
said.
say in England.
I can't do that.
It's gone.
Randolph?
This is where all those historians, what Lawrence has done, what the Church Society does, is we can take criticism. Criticism's really important in society, and we can take debate, but we need intelligent debate, and our duty is to make sure that youngsters, and one of the things that Lawrence has done, has made available the whole Churchill archives to all the schools across the globe free of charge, so youngsters can go and look at an individual bit of history and form their own opinion. Everybody has to make their own opinions and judgments, and Churchill had many faults, and he was a true romantic, and he got many things wrong, but in the test of history, at the core moments, he was the man that made history.
Okay. Let me change topics and follow on the theme of your conversations today, where the star was Jennie. You have a British-born grandmother who became American ambassador to Paris, to France. Tell us the story. How does she go from a country girl to this life?
Well, Granny always said
Pamela
that she was never going to stay in Dorset. She was born and brought up in the countryside, and she wanted more than that. She wanted bright lights, and those lights were going to be very bright for her. So Pam, after the war, she had my father. The marriage didn't work. She went to America. She married Leland Hayward, and they were very happily married. He was a brilliant film producer, South Pacific, Easy Rider, and he died sadly, and she re-met and fell in love with Averil Harriman. Well, it was when the Democrats were in the doldrums. She fundraised, and she found this man, Bill Clinton, and he obviously became president. She got the embassy in Paris and was a brilliant ambassador. And sadly, she died at the Ritz Hotel in Paris. And we came back with her to Washington, and Bill Clinton at her memorial said that he was there because of Pam. She did great service to the American country, which she had chosen to become American.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been given the Sarah eye. One more question? Okay. What's your favourite story about your grandmother, Pamela?
There are just so many, but in those dark days of 1940, she lived at 10 Downing Street. Grandfather Randolph had been sent off to the British Army in North Africa. So there she was at 10 Downing Street with baby Winston, and the threat of German invasion was imminent. And she turned round to Winston and she said, "What can I do to help if Britain becomes invaded?" And he said, "Well, go to the kitchen and get a carving knife and take one with you."
Ladies and gentlemen,
There we go.
Randolph and Jennie Churchill.